Hello, everyone.
Hello everyone, I'm Max from Canada.
I'm Tuti from Thailand.
I took one Spanish class in university 20 years ago, yes, and I don't remember that much, but very interesting because on this channel we react to Spanish and Portuguese content quite a bit, so I mixed both together today. How similar are Spanish and Portuguese language by Lang Focus YouTube channel. It's a very good channel. We reacted to Germany from this channel, Poland, Sweden, Finland. So now it's Spanish and Portuguese together. And maybe Suji and I can learn a little bit the language of both. Yes.
Yes.
Let's get started.
Today I think I'll compare Portuguese with a special dialect of Portuguese called Spanish. Hello everyone, welcome to the Lang Focus channel and my name is Paul. Today's topic is how similar are Spanish and Portuguese. As you probably know, Spanish and Portuguese are both Ibero-Romance languages that share a common origin. They're different enough that they are definitely considered different languages, but they're also closely related and quite similar in many ways. On paper, the two languages look very similar, and speakers of either language can generally read the other language without too much trouble. The spoken languages, however, are more different from each other and less mutually intelligible than the written forms. And Portuguese speakers typically understand spoken Spanish better than Spanish speakers understand Portuguese.
Okay.
Well, actually, it's mostly because of the difference in pronunciation between the two languages, but we'll get into that a little later. Spanish and Portuguese share about 89% lexical similarity, meaning that 89% of the words have a cognate or an equivalent in the other language. Now, that doesn't always mean that 89% of the words will be the same, because some of the different words are very basic and common words. And even though cognate words often look and sound quite similar, there are other cognates that have developed quite differently and now sound and look quite different. For instance, this pair of cognates clearly resemble each other. In Spanish,
mundo,
and in Portuguese,
mundo.
Monde? They don't pronounce the O in Portuguese. Mundo and mund.
Oh.
Yeah. It's almost the same thing, but...
and these words mean earth or world. Now here's a less obvious pair of cognates. In Spanish,
Pez,
and in
Pez.
Portuguese.
peixe,
These words
Pez, page. Oh, that's
Yes.
why. Because when you read it and when you pronounce it, it's so different that they can understand the writing but not the pronunciation. Because the pegs, whatever that is very different.
mean fish. So you can see the connection, but it's not quite so obvious. There are some very common everyday words that are different in the two languages. For example, in Spanish there's
yo
Yo pienso. It
Yo
means
pienso.
I think.
Oh.
I think. Because pensar, penser in French. Because it's similar to French too, and I'm French Canadian, so.
pienso,
from the verb
pensar,
and
yo creo,
from the
Yo
verb
creo.
creer,
which both mean I think.
Oh.
These words have cognates in Portuguese, but it's also very common to say
Eu acho.
from the verb.
Uash.
Achar.
There is a
Achar.
Spanish cognate of this word,
hallar,
but it only means to find, not to think. In Spanish, there's the verb
mirar,
meaning to
Mirar.
look at or to watch. In Portuguese, the common verb is
Olhar.
there is a
Olá.
Portuguese verb,
Mirar.
but it's not commonly used. Personal pronouns. The personal pronouns in the two languages are generally similar, but with slightly different forms. For example,
yo,
Eu.
nosotros,
Nós.
but also
Nosotros.
the formal way of saying you is normally different. In Spanish, it's
usted,
in
Usted.
Portuguese, there's a word,
Você.
but instead,
Você.
people generally say
O senhor.
and,
A senhora.
which is like saying sir or madam. These are equivalents of
señor,
and
señora,
in Spanish, but in Spanish they're not used as pronouns. False friends. You will constantly encounter cognates in Spanish and Portuguese, but you'll also encounter lots of false friends, words that look and sound the same and might share a common
Word that look and sound the same and might share a common origin but have different meaning. This is always difficult.
origin, but their meaning is actually different. And some of these could potentially cause some crazy misunderstandings.
pelado,
In Spanish,
Pelado.
it means
Pelado.
skinned or peeled, but colloquially, it also means someone with a shaved head or a new hair.
Oh.
Oh, peel, skin, you know, peel. I think
okay.
yeah.
Haircut.
Pelado.
In Portuguese,
Pelado. they don't pronounce the ending in Portuguese. They say pelad.
Pelad.
Yeah. Pelado, pelad.
Portuguese, it has
It's funny because pelad, in French we say pelé.
Oh, that sounds the same.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit
That might
similar.
easy
the
for you to
same
learn.
basic meaning of skinned or peeled, but in Brazilian Portuguese, it also means naked. In Portuguese, the word for octopus is,
Polvo.
in Spanish,
Polvo.
the word for octopus is,
Pulpo.
and
Pulpo.
Polvo.
means dust, but it also means something sexual. And kids
Oh.
don't. And
Polvo.
This is the vagina for sure.
Oh,
Because of a word in French again that looks similar to that. The pulv.
Polvo.
means dust, but it also means something
I
sexual.
think that's what it
and
means.
kids don't Google it. In Spanish,
Una cena exquisita.
means a delicious dinner.
Huh? Una
Una cena exquisita.
Oh, una
So-
cena exquisita.
Does this mean that in Portuguese you're gonna say una cena exquisite without the a at the end again?
In Portuguese,
Uma cena esquisita.
means a weird scene. And cena
Oh, this-
is
this-
also a slang
They say it, right?
Yeah, but they don't they macena. They said macena. They don't say uma.
Oh,
It's una and uma. Ah.
uma, yeah.
Uma
I
cena
know.
esquisita.
See,
means
they
a
don't say
weird
uma.
scene,
Wait.
just dinner. In Portuguese,
Uma cena esquisita.
Yeah,
It's like cena.
they said macena.
means a weird scene. And cena is also a slang word for thing, so this could mean a weird thing.
Propina.
In Spanish,
Propina.
means tip, like a tip for a waiter.
Propina.
Means tuition fees, like for you.
See how different it mean? It kind of related to money both, but it's like
University. And in Brazilian Portuguese, it means bribe. So even though lots of words are pretty much the same in either language, it
Yeah.
might be a little dangerous to assume that they mean the same thing. Pronunciation. The main reason that the spoken forms of the two languages are less intelligible than the written forms is because they differ significantly in phonology.
Yeah.
Portuguese has much more complex phonology than Spanish, with many extra sounds. And this is one reason that Portuguese speakers have an easier time understanding spoken Spanish than vice versa. Consonants. In Spanish, the B, D, and G consonants have soft pronunciations that occur,
Soft.
for example, between vowels. The way those soft sounds work is different in Portuguese. European Portuguese has the soft D sound, while some Brazilian accents don't. For example, in Spanish,
Nada.
in Portuguese,
Nada.
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 It's much stronger.
There's a sound.
Nada. Yeah.
and in Brazilian Portuguese,
Nada.
Oh, it's soft too.
Portuguese doesn't have the soft B. In Spanish,
Saber.
in Portuguese.
Saber.
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 Next, the rolled R sound of Spanish corresponds to a rather different sound in Portuguese when it's at the beginning of a word or if it's doubled. In Spanish,
Rápido.
Rápido.
in Portuguese,
Rápido.
Rapid. It sounds like French in Portuguese. Oh, in French, we say rapid. We R-A-P-I-D-E at the end. Rapid. It's very similar to Portuguese.
in Spanish,
Torre.
in
Torre.
Portuguese,
Torre.
Tor. See? Torre. Tor. They don't pronounce the R like in French and Portuguese
Yeah.
too. Torre. Tor.
Next, the sound represented by a double L in Spanish has a corresponding sound in Portuguese represented by LH. For
LH.
example, in Spanish there's,
Fallar.
and in
Fallar.
Portuguese there's,
Falhar.
meaning
Falar.
fail. And Portuguese has some consonants that don't have an equivalent in Spanish. First, a sh sound, spelled with CH or with X. So in Spanish we have,
Llega.
but in Portuguese,
Chega.
meaning
Chega.
arrives. A j sound. In Spanish we have,
Agencia.
and in Portuguese we have.
Agência.
This is another example of a difference in soft consonants. In both languages, the letter G represents a soft G sound rather than a G when it's followed by an E or an I. But the soft sound is different in either language. Listen again.
Agencia.
Agencia.
Agência.
Different in either language. Listen again.
Agencia.
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 Agência.
Gencia. They don't pronounce the A, right? Gencia. There's no A in Portuguese.
Next, a V sound. Spanish doesn't really have a V sound. It does have the soft B, which kind of sounds similar to a V, but Portuguese has a distinct V sound. So in Spanish, we have
visitar,
Visitar.
and in Portuguese, we have
Visitar.
Visitar. Yeah, it sound visitar. It sound more French.
Visita,
in Spanish, we have,
libro,
and in
Libro.
Portuguese, we have,
Livro.
Livro.
and one more.
Livre. Livre. Again, you guys speak French in Portuguese or what? In French, we say Livre, right? But we say livre. Livre. It sounds really that.
A Z sound. The sound Z is not found
Z.
in many Spanish words, but in Portuguese it's very common. So in Spanish we have,
preciso,
Preciso.
and in Portuguese we have,
Preciso.
this sound is often found between vowels and at the beginning of words.
Preciso.
Vowels. There are quite a few more vowel sounds in Portuguese than there are in Spanish. Spanish has 5 pure vowels, while Portuguese has all of those
Wow.
plus 7 additional ones.
7
Spanish
more.
has just one E sound, which sounds like A. Portuguese
A.
has this, and an additional one like
Oh.
the in Spanish,
mero,
in Portuguese,
Mero.
but these ones
Mero.
are the same. In Spanish
mesa,
and in Portuguese,
Mesa.
when a
Mesa.
word has the diphthong ye in Spanish, it usually corresponds to an open E in Portuguese. For example, in Spanish
siete,
and in Portuguese,
Sete.
Set.
Spanish also
It's French again. In French, the number 7 is set.
Oh.
Set. Set. It sounds exactly like how he just said in Portuguese.
has just one O sound, like in the word go, but shorter. But Portuguese has an additional open O, which sounds like the O in pot. In Spanish,
obvio,
in
Obvio.
Portuguese,
Óbvio.
and
Obvio.
sometimes the diphthong ue in Spanish corresponds to the open O in Portuguese. So in Spanish we have,
escuela,
Escuela.
and in Portuguese we have.
Escola.
Escola?
Now these might not seem like major differences so far, but there are lots of differences like that. Reduced vowels. Vowels in Spanish are quite clearly pronounced in their full form, but vowels in Portuguese often become reduced, especially when they are unstressed at the end of a word. So in Spanish we have,
casa,
but in
Casa.
Portuguese we have,
Casa.
in Spanish we
Casa.
have,
libro,
and in
Libro.
Portuguese we have,
Livro.
in
Livre.
Spanish we have,
abre,
which
Abre.
means it opens, and in Portuguese we have
Abre.
Abre.
nasal vowels. Portuguese also has 5 nasal vowels that don't occur in Spanish. A nasal vowel means that some air is released through your nose, which creates a distinct sound. Vowels become nasalized when they are followed by a nasal consonant, an M or an N. In Spanish,
cantar,
and in
Cantar.
Portuguese,
Cantar.
That means singer, right? I feel like.
Canta, canta. Is that like French again?
We say chanteur in French. It's different, yeah.
in Spanish,
insulto,
and in Portuguese.
Insulto.
Insulto.
This also
Insult.
happens when there is a tilde over a vowel, like in this Portuguese word,
Irmã.
meaning sister. Because of the extra vowels in Portuguese, there are also more diphthongs, meaning 2 vowels that blend together in one syllable. This includes some nasal diphthongs. For example, in Spanish we have,
sección,
but in
Sección.
Portuguese it's,
Secção.
in
Secção.
Spanish we have,
limones,
and in
Limones.
Portuguese.
Limões.
Limois.
Little differences like these add up to make Portuguese and Spanish sound rather different. Grammar. Spanish and Portuguese grammar are generally very similar, but they do have numerous differences as well. Gender. Both languages basically have 2 genders, masculine and feminine. But sometimes the gender of cognate words is different. For example, words in Spanish ending with
age,
are masculine, and their equivalents in Portuguese ending in
Agem.
are feminine. So in Spanish we have,
el viaje,
El
which is
viaje.
masculine, but in Portuguese we have,
A viagem.
which
A
is feminine.
viagem.
Both languages have 4 definite articles for the 2 genders in singular and plural. But notice that Spanish also has the neuter singular definite article.
lo,
It's
Lo.
not used with nouns, but with adjectives or possessive pronouns in order to use them like nouns. For example,
lo importante es el amor,
which means the important thing is love. In Portuguese, it would be
O importante é o amor.
with o being
Importante
the
e amor.
masculine singular definite article. Verbs. The way verb tenses work in the two languages is very similar. Almost all verb tenses have an exact equivalent in the other language, just with slightly different conjugations. So in Spanish we have,
Nosotros comemos pescado.
which means we eat fish. And in Portuguese that would be,
Nós comemos peixe.
so
Nós
the present
comemos
tense
peixe.
form is the same. And next a past tense sentence. In Spanish,
Ellos
Los
comieron
comieron
pescado.
pescado.
they ate fish. And in Portuguese,
Eles comeram
Eles
peixe.
comerán peixe.
in this case the conjugations aren't exactly the same, but they are equivalent. Now a future sentence. In Spanish,
Yo comeré
Yo
pescado.
comeré
which
pescado.
means I will eat fish. And in Portuguese it's,
Eu comerei peixe.
Comerá
but
peixe.
without any context given for the simple future tense here, this might sound kind of stiff, and people often use the going to future form instead. In Portuguese it would be,
Eu vou comer peixe.
and in Spanish it would be.
Yo voy a comer pescado.
Voy a comer pescado.
One difference in the verb system is that the perfect tense is formed with a different auxiliary verb. Spanish uses
Haber.
as the auxiliary verb, which means to have, but only as an auxiliary verb. The main verb for to have in Spanish is.
Tener.
Tener.
Portuguese has a verb,
Haver.
but instead the verb
Ter.
is used as the auxiliary verb, which means to have.
Ter.
Is a cognate of Spanish.
Tener.
In Spanish we have,
Yo he leído el libro.
which means I have read the book. And in Portuguese we have,
Eu tenho lido o livro.
which means I have been reading the book. So notice that the auxiliary verbs are different. And notice that the past participle of the verb meaning read is almost the same. But more importantly, note that this type of sentence means something different in either language. In Spanish it means I have read the book. In Portuguese it means I have been reading the book. In other words, the past action is still continuing. In order to say I have read the book in Portuguese, you would use the preterite tense instead, like this.
Eu li o livro.
I believe that Latin American Spanish is more like Portuguese in this regard, and that difference is only in the present perfect. The past perfect doesn't have that kind of difference. So if we want to express they had read the book, in Spanish we would say,
Habían leído el libro.
and in
Habían
Portuguese
leído
we
el
would say.
Eles tinham lido o livro.
Eles
The main
tenían
difference
lido
between
el
these
libro.
two is just the auxiliary verb. Word order. The word order is generally quite similar between the two languages, as you've probably noticed already, but there are some differences too. In yes or no questions, in Spanish, the subject can come either before or after the verb, like this.
¿Habla ella inglés?
Habla
Or-
ella inglés.
¿Ella habla inglés?
Ella habla
But in
inglés.
Portuguese, it must come before the verb, like this.
Ela fala inglês.
Oh.
The placement of object pronouns. In Spanish, the object pronoun normally comes before the verb. For example,
Él me ayudó.
which
Él me
means
ayudó.
he helped me. In Portuguese, it comes after the verb, like this.
Ele ajudou-me.
Another example, in Spanish,
¿Me vas a ayudar o qué?
which means, are you going to help me or what? And in Portuguese,
Vais-me ajudar ou quê?
or,
Vais ajudar-me ou quê?
actually, the location of the pronoun in the first sentence is something that comes from Brazilian Portuguese, but it's sometimes used in Portugal too because of the influence of Brazilian Portuguese, through Brazilian TV shows and the like. Some people consider the second sentence to be more proper in European Portuguese. Contractions with prepositions. In Spanish, prepositions mostly function as individual units, with just these exceptions. The preposition
De,
plus the
De.
definite article
él,
becomes
El.
del,
meaning
Del.
from the. The preposition
a,
plus
él,
becomes
al.
meaning
Al.
to the. There are just
Ah.
those two in Spanish. But in Portuguese, prepositions form all sorts of contractions. So in Spanish, we have,
En el libro.
which means in the book.
En
But
el
in
libro.
Portuguese, we have,
No livro.
in Spanish, we have,
De una señora.
De una
which means
señora.
from a lady. But in Portuguese, we have,
De uma senhora.
in Spanish, we have,
De aquí.
De
meaning
aquí.
from here. But in Portuguese, we have,
Daqui.
De aquí.
Ducky.
Yeah. Yeah, to put the word together, it's kind of
these
normal.
sentences mean Portuguese is a sister language of Spanish. In Spanish,
El portugués es una lengua hermana del español.
Ah, el por...
portugués.
Go. Go, go, go.
Wait. El portugués es una lengua hermana del español.
El portugués es una lengua hermana del español. O portugués es una lengua hermana do español. It's for me it's more difficult in Portuguese because I did not take a class, but see if you read it, you can kind of guess it's mean the same thing, right? A
Yeah.
little bit. But when to pronounce it, it must be very more
in
difficult.
Portuguese.
O português é uma língua irmã do espanhol.
Word for word, it's the Portuguese is a language sister of the Spanish. These sentences consist entirely of cognates and have identical grammar. The main difference is the different definite articles, and the words for sister take a somewhat different form.
Hermana.
Irmã.
This pair of words is a good example of how Spanish and Portuguese cognates can sometimes look and sound quite different. Let's look at one more sentence and see what we find. These mean, very few countries in the world take pride in having so many different styles of music and dance. In Spanish,
Muy pocos países en el mundo están orgullosos de tener tantos estilos diferentes de música y baile.
Muy pocos países en el mundo están orgullosos de tener tantos estilos diferentes de música y baile.
Bye-bye.
word for word, it's very few countries in the world are proud of having so many styles different of music and dance. And then there's the Portuguese sentence.
Muito poucos países no mundo estão orgulhosos de terem tantos estilos diferentes de música e dança.
Word for
My God, muito pocos países no mundo están orgullosos de tener tantos estilos diferentes de música y danza. I cannot pronounce with the pronunciation because to me it sound like a dialect to me of the Spanish version. Like I pronounce very like it's like how I speak French. People say that I sound from deep in the countryside. I don't know how to explain it.
word, very few countries in the
I guess it's
world
just-
are proud of having so many styles different of music and dance. Again, these sentences are similar, but there are a few differences. The way of expressing very few is slightly different, but the words are cognates. Next, notice that in Portuguese, the preposition and definite article contract together into one word, while in Spanish, they're separate words. Next, we see the verb corresponding to be in each language.
Estar.
In Spanish, and also
Estar.
in Portuguese. They are both conjugated
Estão.
in the third person plural present tense, but you can see that
Sí.
the conjugated forms are different in either language. Next, the words here are a bit different. The Spanish word is an infinitive form, while the Portuguese is a personal infinitive. The infinitive by itself is,
Ter.
and also notice that the word for dance is different. But also notice that it sounds like the English word ballet.
Baile.
There's also a cognate word in Portuguese,
Baile.
but in Portuguese it refers to an event like a ball or a prom. And in Spanish there's also the word
Danza.
which refers to specific types of artistic dance as opposed to dancing in general. Very often there are possible cognates for every word in a sentence, but they sometimes have a somewhat different usage or frequency of use in either language. In these two similar sentences, we see how similar the two languages can be, with the biggest difference simply lying in pronunciation, but things are often said more differently. For example, a somewhat more natural sentence in Portuguese might be,
Muito poucos países no mundo se podem orgulhar de ter tantos estilos diferentes de música e dança.
in this variation, rather than to be plus an adjective, here we have can plus the infinitive of a verb meaning to be proud. So, as you can see, Spanish and Portuguese are indeed sister languages that have a lot in common. They do have a lot of little differences that we learned before Portuguese.
Damn.
Difficult, huh? I think because the way that they explain it's like when you learn in class, right?
Yeah.
Did you learn like that in class that you write a sentence and then you put different color on the word, like yellow, green, red on the word for the different part of the word of the sentence? You did that too? That's all you learned, Thai?
Yeah, to remember.
But that's difficult to learn, right? Like this?
No, I mean it takes time.
Yeah.
Like, well, it's quite long too, because you just like follow it, and but when you learn in real life, it's not gonna be like this.
But we can understand the difference between Spanish and Portuguese. Like the language is the pronunciation is very different.
Yeah.
Style of pronunciation, I would say. So yeah, very interesting video. If there's more video about the Spanish language alone or the Portuguese language alone that we should react to, let us know in the comment below. Yes, and see you very soon.